I did not find today's video topic. It found me, sort of. In today's video, we are talking about the game design of the board game, The Magic Labyrinth. Hello everybody, my name is Simon, and on this channel, I talk about everything design. Game design, architecture, graphical design, product design. I do deep dive design reviews, as well as talk about design theory and philosophy. If at any point you find yourself liking this video, make sure you hit that like button, as that really helps with YouTube's algorithm, and subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my upcoming videos. Let me explain what I mean by the game finding me for this video. I'm trying very hard to do my job as a millennial parent and turn my kids into fully formed and evolved gamers. So I buy board games at a regular pace to play with my 5-year-old and build a games library together, where I am the self-proclaimed, all-powerful, very knowledgeable, high-skilled gamekeeper. One of the games I came across is called The Magic Labyrinth. As we started to play, I immediately found the game's design very intriguing as an adult. Even though it is a game designed for children with a relatively simple components put together, the way they're put together and the set of rules affords a bigger play space and emergent dynamics that one would be able to not deduce before playing it. And it's done by exploiting a specific human limitation: our memory. But it is not overdone where you get frustrated because you're overwhelmed. It is actually quite enjoyable and successful, where it creates a nice flow state through a very fine-tuned cognitive challenge. It also uses magnets as a game technology in a very clever way. Let's quickly go through the setup, rules, and gameplay breakdown of the design. The Magic Labyrinth is a 2009 children's fantasy board game designed by Dirk Baumann for 2 to 4 players. The Magic Labyrinth is a game with the objective of finding treasures hidden in the labyrinth. But here's the catch: the labyrinth's walls are invisible, so players must explore the board game and feel out these walls of the maze to memorize the locations of the walls in order to successfully claim these treasure pieces and win the game. The game has a wizard theme setting and is played over a 6x6 rectangular grid. The labyrinth's walls are actually placed under the board, invisible to the players. You have the wizard piece on top of the board and a metal sphere underneath the board connected to the wizard game piece by a magnet. Each player places their piece at one of the 4 corners of the board. At the start of the game, a treasure is randomly selected from a bag and placed in its designated location in the board. At the start of the turn, players throw a die, deciding how many spaces that player can move. If the player's pieces hits a wall, the metal sphere underneath the board falls off, audible to all the players. When this happens, the player forfeits their turn, having to move their piece back to the starting corner. The idea of the game is that the player can't actually see the walls. They only learn of them when they hit them. To be able to proceed, players must learn to memorize the locations of these walls. When a player successfully reaches a treasure, that player claims that treasure, and another treasure is randomly dealt. The first player to claim 5 treasure pieces wins the game. As you start playing, you are presented with a 6x6 rectangular grid that does not hold the promise of interesting or challenging gameplay. I mean, it's a 6x6 with nothing on it. Come on. Except for the player's pieces and the treasure symbol you're trying to acquire. There are no deck of cards with power-ups or actions. There are no other pieces to be added later on. Nothing else. Just a small open board. You roll your dice and get a number. You look at where the treasure piece is at, and you quickly estimate that the piece is 2 turns away from your acquisition. So you start to move in the most direct way possible. And then you hear it in your first tile transition. Thump. You, my friend, just encounter one of the aforementioned invisible walls. You now have to get your piece and move it back to your starting tile as your turn automatically ends. And at that point, you immediately see this game board bigger and more complex than that small and simple 6x6 grid board you initially perceived. The player goes through this continual process of having to use their turn and moves to explore where these invisible walls are, exploring by failing, and try to form an accurate map in their head of the invisible maze underneath the board to get the treasure before any of the other players. Once one of the players is able to successfully make their way to the first treasure piece and claim it, another piece is dealt. Players now have to start forming a plan as to how to get to this new treasure location, trying to use any acquired knowledge so far of the locations of these invisible walls and form a plan as to how to get to these new pieces, either from the tile they were at when the treasure piece was claimed or from their own starting corner tile. As players move, they keep encountering invisible wall after invisible wall that take them back to their starting point to start all over again. As you keep playing, you're engaged with exploring these invisible walls, this invisible architecture of gameplay, to form an accurate map of it in your head to be able to successfully navigate it and win the game. As the game progresses, you start failing less and less, which makes the player feel a sense of progression and mastery without losing being constantly challenged by the game. This constant engagement and resulting gameplay from such a simple setup is due to the game designers capitalizing on one specific human limitation: our memory. You see, we humans have very, very bad memory. We are just not good at remembering, and this game capitalizes on that flaw to expand this very simple game board and make it feel bigger and more complex than what it is. Its complexity and its emergent, newfound challenge come from us having to remember the specific layout of the unseen labyrinth to successfully navigate it and be the first players to gather all the treasures and win the game. Just imagine how very little of a challenge, if at all, would the game offer if the labyrinth walls were exposed instead of hidden. The navigation of the board is now no challenge at all, and the game devolves into a simple dice throwing race between players. Having the labyrinth walls hidden from the players to be discovered and mapped out in their minds doesn't only expand the gameplay, but it also heightens the player's flow state throughout all the game and not just in the player's own turn. Because the walls of the labyrinth are hidden, you are desperately trying to gather as much information as possible of the location of these invisible walls. That means that other players moving on their own turn is also helpful for you, as you now know where there is or isn't a wall, as well as keeping you engaged as you feel the tension of the other player's fate. Will they encounter a wall? Will they succeed and get ahead of me? To help the players with the challenge of remembering the location of the walls and scaling this cognitive challenge presented by the game, the designers did two things. First, they have the treasure symbols printed on the board. This means that those icons do not move, which means that they can be used as reference points by players to aid in the remembering of the wall locations. For example, instead of trying to remember that there is a wall between the third and second tile of the second row from my vantage point, the player can now more easily use the graphical icons as aids, as a tool, and remember that between the feather and the hat, for example, there is or isn't a wall. The second decision made to contain and scale this cognitive challenge was the actual scaling, the actual size of the board. It does not matter how many symbols are provided if the board is a 30 by 30 tile grid, it just becomes too overwhelming for our memory. I think the board being a 6 by 6 tile is the smallest size it can be, where it presents an enjoyable challenge without becoming too frustrating because of its difficulty level, or boring because it's too easy. To further fine-tune the level of the challenge of the game, players can add or subtract as many walls as they want and constantly create their own new labyrinth layouts for their games, creating replayability and avoiding the game just becoming known at some point and losing its edge. I really like the box design for this game. The box is the base for the game board assembly once you take the top off. As mentioned, the game has a visible board and the underlying hidden labyrinth level. There is a third layer underneath the labyrinth, a plastic sloping tray. The space between these two layers, the labyrinth and the tray, is the one used for storing all the game pieces. The labyrinth level fits nicely, as is, when putting the game away as when you are playing, which means you do not have to construct and deconstruct the labyrinth layout every time you play, which lowers its barrier of usage. A cool part about this game's product design is that it uses metal balls held in place by a magnet in the player piece with a board game in between them. This is a mechanism that permits this whole game to exist by being able to hide the labyrinth walls from the players to not be seen but still affect the player movement. As you move the piece from one tile to another, you can tell and feel if you have encountered an invisible wall, since if you do, you will hear the metal ball falling into the plastic tray below, making an audible thump sound. The ball will fall in one of the 4 sloping quadrants of the tray and slope to the player corners where it is accessible without having to lift the board game and expose the labyrinth layout to the players. As I alluded to at the start of the video, I bought this game without looking too much into it and got pleasantly surprised by its design. I would definitely recommend this game for children, but also for adults. I can see a slightly more elaborated version of this game appealing primarily to an adult audience and being very interesting. The only feedback I have for the game is that the treasure pieces should be of a different color from the board game itself, so they are more easily identified when they are placed on the board. They're the same color, so they just, it takes a second to identify the treasure pieces once they're there. Old eyes. Link to the game is in the description below if you want to check it out. If you like this video, make sure to click that like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my videos. If you want to check out some of my past videos, I have a few I think might interest you down in the description below. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this board game design or about the video in general. I would like to keep this game design conversation going, and I'm always looking for feedback as I am still learning how to make better video content for you all. With that said, I will see you in the next video.